Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot Daf Tet. Today's daf is sponsored by Professor Jonathan Ben Ezra in honor of his wife, Dr. Robin Zeiger. I'm so proud that we were able to finish Seder Moed together. Today's daf is also sponsored by Jennifer and Joshua Lankin in loving memory of Jennifer's brother, Avigdor Chai Avraham Ben Rachel Leah and Meir Tzvi, and in honor of her grandma, Marilyn Kamen, daughter Adi, and all Agunot on this International Aguna Day. My grandmother is an inspiration through her daf learning, and I pray my daughter Adi will grow up to love learning Torah. Okay, I want to start with a comment on what happened yesterday. Yesterday, we ended Shiur with this issue about Yibum Ba'al Korcha, okay? Somebody doing Yibum with someone against her will. I saw a lot of harsh reactions to this. And I want to, number one, point out that I maybe made a mistake by not dealing with it properly. It was at the end of class and I had to get my daughter out to costume day at school. So sometimes things like that happen and we didn't have time to deal with it. But I also want to kind of make a comment to everybody who had the harsh reactions that you should be wary of reacting to the Gemara in such a way without seeing the full picture, okay? We're talking about people here who haven't seen every daf of Yevamot, and even if you have, you might not remember it all. And when you learn the Gemara, you're learning one little snippet that's part of a very big picture. And it's very important not to take one thing and say, wait, how could the Gemara say this without actually fully understanding it? And I did mention at the end of class, although I think it got a little bit lost there, that we will deal with this as time goes on. But I know it's hard for people to understand that. And it's like I said in the beginning of Yevamot, it's like watching a movie in the beginning and you don't exactly understand what's going on. And as the stories unfold and the details unfold, you'll get a fuller picture. Despite my wanting to wait till we see things inside, I see the reactions and I want to deal with it right now and explain to you something about this background. The first thing I have to say about this is I don't believe that the Gemara really thought that this was a situation that was going to happen, number one, okay? And I'll tell you why, because it brings this up in the context of, okay, and we'll see this, what I did was, it really comes up in the Gemara, but it's often better when you see it in the Rambam. The Rambam explains things very clearly and succinctly. So what I did was I'm bringing you the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. The first thing I want to read is actually the second halacha, okay? The Rambam in Hilchot Yibum B'Chalitza, Perek Bet, halacha Aleph to Bet. Okay, we're going to read halacha Bet first. Habal Yivim To, this is based on, it's straight out of a Gemara. It's actually quoted in Nezikin, okay? Because Nezikin talks about if you do damages, whether you do it accidentally or by accident or you were forced to, etc. Haval Yivim To, someone who sleeps with his Yevama, Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, unwittingly or on purpose. Okay, how you would do it b'shogeg is hard to understand. Bein b'ones, bein b'ratzon. Bein shayu mezid v'hi shogeget or anusa. Okay, whether he was intentional or shogeget or anusa. Bein shehi mezida v'hu shogeg. They even bring the opposite. Oh, anus. It could be he's anus. First of all, notice the both directions. Bein shai tayishay. Now whether she was sleeping or awake. Bein shabala kedaka. Okay, we're not going to get into all this, but that's the first thing to know. So why is this important? We'll bring back the first halacha in a minute. The Gemara, first of all, in Nezikin, and I think it might come up in Yevamot also, I don't remember, but I remember it specifically from Nezikin, talks about a case where somebody falls off a roof, I think it is, falls onto the woman, has relations with her as he's falling onto her, and with that, he fulfills the mitzvah of Yibum. Now, you might say, oh, right, so that's about as unrealistic as can be, right? You can't get more unrealistic than that. So what's my point? My point is the Gemara is discussing theoreticals here. They're not talking about practically what would happen if someone did this. They're saying theoretically, because the Torah words it all in the masculine, and it says Yivama Yavo Aleha, where he is the main player. So the first point to understand is it's just taking a drasha from the pasuk and saying, theoretically, if this were to happen, that would be the case. They're not saying we expect this kind of case to happen, just like they don't expect a man to fall off the roof onto an unclothed woman, have relations with her accidentally, and let's be real, right? Let's be real. That's not happening. Likely this isn't happening either, and I'll give you some other proofs. First of all, we saw already that the woman can say, I don't want to do Yibum, I want to do Chalitza. So therefore, Yibum Ba'al Korcho is pretty irrelevant because she'll probably, right, unless he really rapes her, which is unlikely that that's what he's going to do, right? She can say, I'm not interested. But I want to show you the next step, which is even more interesting in my mind, which is, the rabbis didn't like this either. So for all you people who are upset about this, the rabbis were also upset about this, okay? And they changed things. And this is what's amazing about the halachic system. The rabbis come and say, Midivrei sofrim, I'm going to warn you right now, okay? Because of all these reactions, I I'm doing this. It's going to cost us a little bit because the last case of the Gemara is quite complicated today, but hopefully you'll bear with me. And if Shiur's a little longer, it will be. But midivrei sofrim, the rabbis say, shelo yavo hayabam al yevimto, ad shikadesh ota b'fnei shnei edim, b'pruta or b'shavet pruta. V'zehu hanikra ma'amar. We're going to learn about ma'amar, which is basically, the rabbi said, even though the Torah says, how do you fulfill yibum? By having sexual relations. But they said, we want to make this more like marriage. Marriage, you don't do it. First, you have kiddushin, which you can do through sexual relations, but the rabbis didn't really approve of that. They instituted that you should really do it, right? There's 3 ways to do it. We'll get all to that in kiddushin, but you should really do it first with money or, some sort of, right? That's why we have a ring. They instituted the same thing, and it's called ma'amal because you make a declaration, okay? And they did that, right? They said, better not to do yibum without this first stage, okay? So therefore they said, you can't. Now, I forgot. Oh, it's not here. Okay, fine. I'm going to just tell you. I don't know why it's not here. I thought it was here, but anyway, now I just remembered. I forgot to say this in the Hebrew class. But anyway, we'll go on a little bit more. Okay, it doesn't work on a Doraita level because it's not a Torah law. Lo asa klum. Here you have it. Okay, and this is based on the Gemara later. Okay, so that's why I said you can't just look at one thing in a vacuum. If you do ma'amal without her, against her will, you didn't do anything. In other words, what they're saying is ma'amar without her wanting it is invalid, just like kiddushin is invalid. Fine. Okay. The part that I somehow missed here that I wanted to bring is that, and the Gemara says this, if someone does yibum without ma'amal, they give him lashes. Okay. They didn't want people to do this. And ma'amar needs her consent. So basically they neutralized this whole halacha. So for anyone who was bothered by it, so were the rabbis, and the rabbis changed it. Okay. So you might say, well, how could the base halacha and the Torah be that way? But again, I think that sometimes the rabbis are dealing with reality. Maybe the Torah, it was just more like, okay, the man is supposed to be the one to make this happen. But it doesn't, and then the rabbis say, well, it looks like, she has no part in it. But then the rabbis kind of say, well, we're going to make her have a part in it. We're going to make her be, that she has to have a say in the matter. So anyway, we're going to, like I said, we're going to see this much more inside. We have a whole masechet, and we're going to deal with a lot of these issues. So again, I'll just warn you, try not to react so strongly, negatively, when you see something without understanding the full picture. Okay. And like I said, I'll try more. If I do say something that, sometimes opens a bomb, I'll try to address it more at the time, although I just don't always have the time to do it. Okay. Like you'll see today, we're going to pay a price. Okay. Here we go. Rabbanan hai ale mai avidle. So now the question is this. What we had Rebbe and we had the rabbis. And Rebbe learned his whole drasha from Likacha Yibma. That's how he learned you can't do Yibum on Isra Araya, which was the basis for our Mishnah, and for the Tzarot and the Tzarot. The rabbis learned it all from the word Aleha. So the word Aleha in the pasuk, Yishalachota lo tikach letzor legalot erata Aleha. That's how he learned it. What does Rebbe do with the word Aleha then? He doesn't need it for that drasha. So what does he do with it? So now, again, we're going to need a lot of background to today's stuff. We're going to open the study guide. Okay, and we're going to look through a bunch of verses in the Torah because we're getting off on a total tangent. Luckily, for people who were in shul this week, this was Parshat Shavua. So it might be a little bit familiar, even though it might be a little bit of an unfamiliar section. But by the time you finish getting through all of the Gemara, this will not be so unfamiliar because we're going to see it many times. Vayikra chapter 4 has a list of 4 categories of people who make mistakes. Okay, the whole section starts off, if somebody does something unwittingly, from any of the mitzvot, sounds like any of the mitzvot, and soon we're going to learn the whole drasha has to tell you it's not any of the mitzvot, okay? But right now it sounds like, again, another good example. The Torah seems to say it one way, the rabbis are going to darshan it a different way. And then it starts listing who and what they bring. So if it's a Kohen HaMashiach, which basically means the Kohen Gadol, he brings a par ben bakal, a bull offering. If it's Kol Adat Yisrael, that's Pasuk Gimel, the whole, right? We have the whole community, which is usually considered the majority of the people of Israel, make a mistake, right? Usually it's because the court taught something incorrectly. Everybody went by the court and it turned out it was a mistake. So they bring a par ben bakar. That's what we call, in other words, and it comes up many times, par elem davar shel tzibor. We saw this, I believe it was in Yoma when we had the par of the Kohen Gadol and we compared the par and the par. Okay. Nasi. you have the head of the community, right? The Nasi, or the head of the people, and he brings the Seir Izim. Okay, if he does something wrong, since again he and the Kohen Gadol, they're kind of in a different position, they have to bring a special korban. He brings the Seir Izim. Yachid says im nefesh echad tachta b'shkaga. He brings Seirat Izim. Okay, that's a female Seir Izim. Now, in Bamidbar Tevav, it has a very similar section. It says, Ki tishgu v'lo tasu, if you make a mistake and you don't do it, kol mitzvot ha'el asher tziber Shem Moshe, what he told you, blah, blah, blah. And if me'inei ha'ida ne'asa l'shkaga, so everybody brings a par ben bakar chalola and a series in a chalachata. Now it seems weird. We already said if you make a mistake, and what do we say? You bring a par. Here it says a par la'ola and a seir l'chata. So what's going on? So Rashi, based on the Gemara, says, okay, number one, he says, in the second Rashi here, and he brings this bright that says, how do we know it's about, right? Maybe it's all the other mitzvot, but it already said all the other mitzvot, so it must be, this is avodah zarah, which is compared to all the other mitzvot. So basically, the rabbis understand that this whole section of Bamidbar, which talks about, number one, the community, and then further on in Pasuk 15, it says, Im nefesh echad techta, they bring an A's. If an individual does it, he brings an A's. Then it means this must be if they make a mistake in avodah zarah specifically. There's a unique korban. So we now have, right, let's talk. We have Kohen Mashiach, the whole people, the Nasi, an individual, the community for avodah zarah, and the individual for avodah zarah. 6 different sacrifices. And then at the end of the section of avodah zarah, I'm giving you the background for all the verses that we're going to darshan soon. It says, Torah achat yelachem la'oseh b'shkaga. There's one rule for all of you who do things unwittingly. And whoever does this, whatever, gets karet. Okay, so that's important for you to see. Now I'm going to leave up the sheet because I made a lot of charts about this. Okay, the first chart on the page is all the previous drashot. The first 4 are the ones we darshaned, who learns from where what. And then we have this new halacha that Rebbe is going to darshan from Aleha. Okay, so right now we're on the 5th line of the 5th row of that chart. So starting now, okay, we're only getting started now with the daf, a lot of introductions, but let's go. Rebbe, hi Aleha me adve. What does he do with the word Aleha? He needs it for the following drasha. En chayavim betin, that's the par helem davar shel tzibor, if the court teaches something incorrectly. They're not chayavim ela, and as for what do they have to bring a korban, we're going to see. Only al davar shes dono karet b'shigato chatat. If we make a mistake about something small, we don't bring, if it's a regular lo taseh, we don't bring a korban. We only bring it if it's davar shes dono karet, if it's something that if we did it on purpose, we would have gotten karet, and now we did it right. But if you do it unwillingly, you bring a chatat. That's what we bring this par helem davar shel tzibor for. Okay, that's the first drasha. Okay, and now we're going to see it further down here. Okay, Shitav Rebbe, where do we learn beitim? Beitim means par helem davar shel tzibor. We learn it from Arayot. How do we get it? We'll see in a minute. V'chein Mashiach, by the way, this zdono karet shegato chatat category is true not only for par helem davar shel tzibor, also chen Mashiach, also for the Kohen Mashiach. V'lo b'avodah kochavim ela al davar shezdono karet b'shigato chatat. Okay, it's basically applicable to the Kohen Mashiach, to the avodah kochavim, all these things, and we'll see even more. Utnanami, and there's another Mishnah that goes even into more detail. Kol mitzvah shebetorah shechayavim al zdono karet b'shigato chatat. They're coming a little bit from a different perspective. This Braita, it says, any mitzvah that you get karet for if you do it on purpose, and a chatat if you do it accidentally, on those things, Yachid maybe kivsa u'sira, Nasi maybe seir, Mashiach u'beitim meviim par, u'bavadak kochavim Yachid, Nasi u'Mashiach meviim sira, Tzibor meviim par v'seir, par le'olah v'seir l'chatat. I'm not going to explain all those one by one, but that's exactly this chart over here, and it's exactly what I showed you in the psukim. So if it's something that, it has to be something that's dono karen shigato chatat, that's the main thing we're going to darshan out. How do we get that? And that's going to be true across the board for all these. And then each one has their individual sacrifice that they bring. Minahane mile. So where do we get this all from? Ditanu Rabbanan. It says in a bright. Okay, so what does that mean? This is the verse. Okay, let's just go back down to the psukim. Okay. Sorry. That's in the, sorry, I thought it was here. Mistake. Let's just look at, okay, sorry. Vayikra Dalid Yudal. This is Parhalem Davar Shel Tzibur. If they find out in Vayikra Dalid Yudalid, if they find out that they did something, then it says Vikrivu Parbim Bakal. So now notice the word Aleha, right? Asher Chatu Aleha. There's our word Aleha that we've been darshaning. Rebbe Omer, Ne'emar Kan Aleha, Ne'emar Lahalan Aleha. Now we want to get back to our pasuk about Isha Lachota. Now Isha Lachota, what's the situation? If you do it on purpose, you get karet. If it's accidental, you bring a chatat. So mala halan davar shechayvim al zono karet al shagato chatat. Just like by isha lachota, the arayot, it's karet and chatat. Afkan, therefore, from the word aleha by parhalem davar shel tzibur, davar shechayvim al zono karet al shagato chatat. Okay, and now what we're going to do according to Rebbe, we're going to now darshan. Once we have the parhalem davar shel tzibur is on something that's karet and chatat. Then, and that we learned from our ayot, that was our whole, that's how we got there. We're now going to learn from Paralem Davar Shel Tzibur, from all other Gzera Shavas. This again is Gzera Shava. Aleha and, right, Aleha here and Aleha there. Now we're going to do the same thing with all the other cases. Eshkachan Tzibur. Okay, so we get Tzibur is that. What about Mashiach? What about the Kohen Gadol, Minalan? Dichtib b'Mashiach la'ashmat ha'am. Here it's not exactly Gzera Shava, but it says la'ashmat ha'am. What do we learn from there? Hare Mashiach kitzibur. That teaches us he's like the nation. So whatever's true for the nation is true for him. It would only be a chatat. That would only be if there's karet, if you did it on purpose. And again, this wouldn't apply for any sin that he did that wasn't karet, that wasn't punishable by karet. Yachiv and Asi. Where do we get that? Ake mitzvot. Okay. Okay. Now we have Ba'asu Chamikom mitzvot Hashem by Tzibur. We have Asamikom mitzvot Hashem by the Nasi, and we have Asutach mitzvot Hashem by the Yachid. So because it appears mitzvot by the Paralem Davar Shel Tzibur, and we know that's only karet, so therefore the Nasi says mitzvot, the Yachid says mitzvot. Therefore, we're going to learn from one to the other. Below ba'avodah kochavim el al davar shezdono karet shechayavin al zdono karet al shagato chatat. How do we know now by avodah zara that it's only in that case also? So again, avodah kochavim is going to split into community does it or an individual does it. So yachid, nasi, and individual will be yachid, nasi, or mashiach. Those are all individuals, but different types of individuals. They're going to usually become together because there's this pasuk that says im nefesh echad. Nefesh echad means one person, and that's going to include any individual, whether he's a yachid, a nasi, or a mashiach. Yachid, nasi, or mashiach mean, again, mashiach doesn't mean mashiach. Mashiach means kohen mashiach, which means he was anointed, which means he's the kohen gadol. So yachid, nasi, and mashiach mivi'im nefesh echad. Okay, when it says there by avodah zara. You see, one second, going back to the verses. Sorry, I went too far. By avodah zara, remember in Pasuk Kaf Zayin in Bamidbar, chapter 15, it says V'im nefesh echad techtav shkaga. So im nefesh echad comes to echad yachid, echad nasi, echad mashiach b'mashma. Now, how do you get from there that it's connected to what it is? Also, once we got the tzibur. Oh, sorry, I think I skipped a line. Tzibur ba'avodah kochavim yalef me'enei me'enei. Okay, by tzibur here, it says in avodah zara, it says, Vayayim me'enei ha'ida ne'estash lishkaga. Okay, I forgot to bold everything. But in me'enei ha'ida, that's in Pasuk Kaf Bet in Bamidbar. And it says me'enei in the Parhalem Davar Shel Tzibur. So that's how we learn, okay, Vayayim e'dev ben Yisrael yishku, they'll make a mistake, Pasuk Gimel, v'ne'elam hadavar me'enei ha'kahal. So me'enei, that teaches us by tzibur. How do we get the yachid? Well, after it mentions the tzibur in Tevav, it then says V'im nefshecha. V'e connects it to what was above. Whatever's true for above is true for here. Chad yachid, chad nasi, chad mashiach b'mashma, right? Im nefshecha includes them all. Vav mosif al inyan rishon. Vav connects it. V'yomad tachton min ha'elyon. And then we learned the previous from, right? We learned this part from the previous section. Okay, so basically, we learned Paralem Davar Shel Tzibur from Isha Lachota. From there, everything else was connected to Paralem Davar Shel Tzibur, either directly or indirectly, as the individual in Avodah Zarah was learned from the Tzibur of Avodah Zarah. Now, the whole question, which is going to complicate things even more, is, okay, that's Rebbe. Rebbe started off with the drasha of Aleha. Now, the rabbis don't have the drasha of Aleha free because they use Aleha for our Mishnah. So how are they going to darshan all this? Okay, they're going to darshan it a little bit simpler. Rabbanit Michelle Farber, Nafkale, but they're going to go the reverse. We started from Paralem Davar Shel Tzibur and we ended with those last verses of Avodah Zarah. This is going to be the flip. We're going to start with the very last verses of Avodah Zarah at the very end of that section. In Bamidbar Kaftet, it says, they all have the same law. And anyone who does this on purpose, gets curried. So what are they going to say here? Rabbanan say like this. They learn it from what Rabbi Yeshua told his son. There's one rule that connects all of these, right? They're all the same, even though they're not all the same, right? We just said they're all different. But what's the same about them? Well, and then it says v'nichrita, which means karet is in that pasuk. That's going to be our proof that it's all karet. Hukshu kol Torah kola lavodat kochavim. Ma avodat kochavim davar shechayvim al zdono karet al shigato chatat af kol davar shechayvim al zdono karet al shigato chatat. They basically take the individual in Avodah Zarah and they say, look, by the individual, it says whoever does this, right, b'nichrita will get karet. And then they're basically saying, right, Avodah Zarah is karet. So therefore, and then it says Torah achat. That's going to include any nefesh, right? Ha-nefesh, which is an individual, is going to have to be karet, okay? Individual by Avodah Zarah. So eshkachan yachid nasi u'mashiach. Bein ba'avodah kochavim, bein b'shar mitzvot. What basically this says is, anyone who does bishkaga. So now it's basically saying any individual who does bishkaga, it's a very easy way to include more categories all at once. Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, whether they did Avodah Zarah or whether they did all mitzvot, they're all included in this pasuk and they're all the same, has to be karet. Sibur ba'avodah kochavim minayim, but where do we get the community? The same thing we did before, but the reverse. V'im nefesh, Yevamot al Yomi tachton, we're going to switch the order. V'im nefesh connected. The last section started with V'im Nefesh and connected it to the previous section. The previous section was the Tzibur and Avodah Zarah, and therefore whatever's true for this is going to be true for that as well. We're doing, instead of saying N comes to say let's learn from above, it's N comes to say what we learn below is true for above. Now they say Elet Tzibur b'shar mitzvot minalan. The one thing we're left with, which is funny because that's where we started in the first one, is the par helem davar shel tzibur. Where do we get that? We're going to do again the reverse gzeira shava we did before. Yelef me'enei. Remember, me'enei appear by the tzibur of Avodah Zarah, and the enei appear by the tzibur of a regular sin. And therefore, we're going to compare and say the par helem davar shel tzibur, when the tzibur makes a mistake on any other mitzvah, that we're going to learn out from the tzibur of Avodah Zarah. Okay, so it's kind of an undoing, right? It's the exact reverse direction of the drashot that we did before. Okay, you can go, I know this sounds a little bit confusing, but it's actually pretty organized. And if you look back at the chart, it should help you organize it all. Now we're left with a few ping pong still. Rebbe, hi Torah achat my avidle. What does he do with Torah achat? That pasuk was only used by Chachamim. He didn't darshan that pasuk at all. This Torah achat he needs for a different thing. One thing you have to know about Avodah Zarah is there's an individual can do Avodah Zarah. Here we see the community, right? And there's kind of this, either the majority of the people or an individual. What is it mentioned there? If you do Avodah Zarah on purpose, there's a unique halacha called an ir hanidachat. What if a whole city worships Avodah Zarah? Now, a whole city, right, let's say my city, Ranana, that's not the majority of the Jewish people, but it is an entire city. And it has its own unique laws if I were to do it intentionally. We basically bring all of our property, our possessions to the middle of the city. We burn the city. Everybody gets killed. Everybody gets killed by saif, which is by the sword. It's one of the lesser of the punishments of the Beit Din, as opposed to, let's say, skila, which is very severe. I'm specifically mentioning those because we're going to see in the Gemara in a second. So they say like this. Since when you do it intentionally, there's a split between an individual and a community. An individual gets skila, which is the most severe if you worship Avodah Zarah, but because you get such a severe punishment, we don't burn all your possessions. The city gets a lesser punishment, a less severe, but mamonam palat, we destroy all their possessions. So it's kind of, right, there's balance here. But the point being that they each have their own unique halachot. It's not the same for an individual and for a city. So now they're going to suggest maybe they have their own unique sacrifice, right? We had an individual has its own unique sacrifice. We had the community, but what about a whole city? Is there a unique sacrifice? Were they to do it unintentionally? The whole difference was intentional. What if it's unintentional? Talmud Lomar, that's why it says Torah achat yelachem. There's one law for all of them. That's to tell you, even a city does the same as an individual. He basically asks on, what was your Havamina? What were you thinking? Right? Your whole thing is that there's a drasha to tell you. Otherwise, you would have thought it would have its own unique korban. And he basically says, it's a bit of a strange question, but he says, what korban did you think they were going to have? And that everything's kind of taken, is what he's going to basically say. My light to, what would you bring? Light to pal, you would say a bull. Well, tzibor b'shanei mitzvot hu d'maite. That's what the whole community brings. Kisba, if you want to bring that, yachi b'shar mitzvot hu d'maite. Well, an individual brings that for other mitzvot. Seir nasi. This is Seir, sorry, the goat. Nasi b'shar mitzvot hu d'maite. The nasi brings that. Parla olav seir l'chatat tzibor b'avadach l'chavim Davide. Right? He brings all the possibilities. He basically said everything's taken for something else. You want a unique korban? Well, they're all taken. The elamai seira. All you're left with really is seira. Well, yachid nami hainu korbano. That's also the individual's korban if they did avodah zarah. So, what exactly were you thinking? No, I really thought so because sachadat hachamina ho'il v'tzibor b'hora'a. Maitu parla olav seir l'chatat. Since if the tzibor messes up and they think that something's not avodah zarah, right? The beitin teaches, and then it turns out it was avodah zarah, and they all did it. What would you have to do? You bring a parla olah, a bull for an olah offering, and a seir, a goat for a chatat. Inu nami netu ipcha. Maybe if it's a city, you would flip it. You bring the bull for the sin offering, and you bring the goat for the olah, for the burnt offering. That's one suggestion. Inami tzarich ve'en takana. Or you might have thought you need to bring a unique korban, but we don't have a unique korban. And maybe if a city does it unwillingly, there's no solution and you can't ever get atonement for it. Kamash malan, that's why you need the drasha to teach you. No, it's just like an individual. Okay. Not what you might have thought. It doesn't have its own unique law. Now we get to, that's the end of that section. Okay, we finished Rebbe and the rabbis. This is all about their drasha Allah. How do we get to all the bases of the Mishnah? Now we're going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah, as you know, listed 15 cases. Okay, if you haven't reviewed them yet, you can go review them again. Anyway, the Mishnah listed 15 cases. Amalei Levi LeRebbe. My area detane chamshasal, litne shishasal. Why does it say 15? Should have said 16. So, Rebbe has a very, talk about strong reactions. Rebbe has a very strong reaction to this comment of Levi, and you can read Flashback of Shulit Mishkan to talk about a little bit of the history of Rebbe and Levi and suggestion as to why he reacted so harshly. This guy seems to have no brain in his head. Okay, and he doesn't even talk to him directly. He says, right, it seems to me like this guy has no brain in his head. He's talking about him in the third person. Then he says, my data, what were you thinking exactly? Okay, what were you thinking? Imon Usat Aviv, were you thinking of Imon Usat Aviv and that should have been there? Imon Usat Aviv pluged to Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanani Uba pluged to Lo Kamayre. I'll talk about Imon Usat Aviv in 1 second. Let's just get through the line. He says, what? Is that the case you wanted to add? That case, the machloket. The rabbis of Rabbi Yehuda, there's a debate about this case, whether the tzarot are permitted or not. And therefore, this Mishnah wasn't dealing with things that were debatable. Okay, it only mentioned things that were agreed upon by everybody, right? If you can imagine such a thing. So here goes. Here's our case of Imon Usat Aviv. Okay, we're going to have a lot of charts now. Yiftach marries Tamar and they have a son named Shimon. Okay, so far no rape yet. Okay, now Imon Usat Aviv means the mother, right, who was raped by his father. So now Yiftach, in the meantime, rapes a woman named Yael. Again, right? This is theoretical, right? All these cases are very theoretical. But, I mean, maybe it could happen, but Yiftach rapes Yael, and they have a son named Reuven. Okay, so Reuven and Shimon are brothers through their father, which means that if Yibum, right, if one dies without children, they do Yibum because anyone who shares a father does Yibum. Okay, it's always brothers by the father. And that we'll get to why that is and all that. Now, what if the woman who Yiftach raped went ahead and married Yiftach's son? Okay, so Yael was here. She moves down here. We kind of left her there faded so that you could see. So she was Yiftach's rape victim. Now she ends up marrying his son. And his son has another wife named Shula. So that's going to be the tzara. So now you can figure this out. If Shimon's going to die, Yael, okay, falls to Yibum to Reuven. Now, what's her relationship to Reuven? Imo Anusat Aviv. It's his mother who comes through rape from the father. So there's a debate about this case, about whether Shula is exempt or not. Okay, so there's a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. Because it's through rape, maybe it's different. And therefore comes the Gemara, and the Gemara says, because there's a debate about this, therefore it's not mentioned in the Mishnah. Okay, that's what you have to understand. So now they say, wait a minute, vilo. And again, we're going to have some situations here where I'm not going to explain everything yet today because this references a lot of other sugyot. Some of them I will because I feel like it's important. Some of them I'm just going to mention in a minute and we're going to move on because otherwise we'll never finish our daf. Vilo, is it really true that the Mishnah in Yevamot, right now they're assuming it means the Mishnah in Yevamot in general, doesn't mention things that are issues of debate? Go look in chapter 3. There's things that are Isur mitzvah, there's things that are Isur kedusha. I'm not going to get into what all that is. We'll see it when we get to chapter 3. And there happens to be a machloket, Rabbi Kiva Rabbanan mentioned in the Mishnah, and yet it says it there. So what do you mean we don't mention things that are not that are machlokot? Bit pirkin kamrin, and I was talking about in our chapter, not in chapter 3. I was talking about in our chapter. Okay, well, if you want to say our chapter, well, let's look farther. You're going to find this very interesting. Later, we're going to see a Mishnah that basically says that our whole Mishnah is only according to Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai thinks that the tzarot can marry the brothers. They have a whole different view of this whole thing. Tzarot can marry brothers, no problem, even if the first wife was Isur Arayot. And there you have machloket. So what do you mean the Mishnah in our chapter doesn't mention machlokot? So they have an interesting answer. Beit Shammai b'makom Beit Hillel ain't a Mishnah. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, that's not a machlok, it's a machloket, but it doesn't bother us to mention it because everybody knows that we hold like Beit Hillel. So everyone will know that Beit Shammai, right, we don't hold that way, so they don't mind mentioning it because everyone knows what the story is. We don't want to mention things that are disputes because people won't know which is which and what, but this everybody knows, so it's not a problem to mention. What about the 14th case in our Mishnah? You remember this? If a couple is married and the husband dies before a new brother is born, we say, the brother's not there in the picture. She can't do yibum with him. And then she's forbidden to him forever. He will always be a raya, right? Even if she marries another brother and that brother's alive. And then let's say she does yibum with a brother she does yibum with Shimon. Okay. I didn't do a chart here because I'm going to do it on a much more complicated case that builds off of this. So we'll see that later, but I'll explain it in simply, which is if she's married to Ruvain dies. She then married before she does yibum with Shimon, new brother's born, then, or even after, we'll talk about that after. If she marries Shimon, she does yibum with him because she can't marry him otherwise. According to the rabbis, she will forever be forbidden to that new brother that was born because he is Eshet Ach compared to her first husband. Rabbi Shimon disagrees a little bit. Rabbi Shimon says, and this is going to be the thing, Rabbi Shimon says that if she's born, the brother's born before she does yibum with Shimon, then you're right, it will be forbidden to her forever. But if the child is born after she already does yibum with Shimon, then she creates a new relationship with this new brother. And if the new brother is born before Shimon were to die, she'd be able to do yibum with him. That's what Rabbi Shimon says. Okay, we'll see it inside in a few minutes. But the idea here is that's if you have a brother who was not around when the husband died, Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan, there's a machloket with them about a particular case within that. And v'katane, right? Period. So that's a machloket, and yet it's mentioned in the Mishnah. So again, how can you say the Mishnah doesn't mention things that are subjects of debate? So they say, well, v'katane binoladu levasaf yibem lo palig Rabbi Shimon. There is a case where they agree about, which is what I said before. If the kid was born after Ruvain died, before she did yibum with Shimon, that brother will be forever forbidden, even according to Rabbi Shimon. Since there is one case about that they agree on, you could put it in the Mishnah. That's the answer. The answer is they disagree within that case about a particular scenario, but they don't disagree about everything, and therefore it can be in the Mishnah. But Rabbi Yoshaya says, no, this isn't an erva at all, according to Rabbi Shimon. Hi, Totiv Rabbi Yoshaya. And we'll get to this later in the Gemara. This will be discussed much more in depth later. But Rabbi Yoshaya's question is knocked off, and therefore don't bother with it. Okay? So basically the answer is, right, we keep trying to say, is there really no machloket? We saw machloket in Perek Shlishi. Oh, that doesn't bother us. We saw machloket Beit Shammai. That doesn't bother us. We saw machloket Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Rabbanan about this. That doesn't bother us because there is a case they all agree about that it's forbidden, and that's the case the Mishnah is referring to. If you didn't understand the case fully, we're going to see it at the very end, so you'll get it again. Now they say, okay, now we're going to start a long question that's only going to end at the end. So right now, imagine put out of your mind why we're bringing this sugya. Okay, we're bringing it again as a case. Isn't there a machloket mentioned in the Mishnah? But put that out of your mind because we're really going to deal with that even more tomorrow. Right now, I want you just to fully understand what we're talking about. This is a bit of a complicated case. Didn't Rabbi Yehuda say in the name of Rav? Tani Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia had a braita about this. Remember, Rabbi Chia is the one who put together the Tosefta. He had a parallel to our Mishnah that really kind of discussed our Mishnah and related. Often it relates to the Mishnah. Bikulan, with all, now we assume kulan right now means all 15 cases in the Mishnah. Ani kore behen, I can find a case. Ha'asura lezeh muteret lezeh, asura lezeh muteret lezeh. Okay, you're not supposed to really understand any word of that yet. Okay, and in fact, before we even learn this, we have to learn the background of the Mishnah on Daf Kavav, which relates to this. Okay, like I said, sometimes I'm going to teach you things that are said elsewhere if they're necessary for right here. So let's go to the Mishnah on Daf Kavav before we even learn this. The Mishnah there discusses Arba'a Achim, 4 brothers, Shnayim mehen nisuot shtei achayot. 4 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, are married to Rachel and Leah. Then, Metu hanisuim et ha'achayot. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't say this right. Okay, let's just look at the pictures. So they're married to 2 sisters. Reuven marries Rachel, Shimon marries Leah. Okay, now what happens? Umetu. Both Reuven and Shimon die. Now, what becomes the issue here? The halacha is going to be the wives can only do chalitza, they can't do yibum. Why? So what happens here is, as soon as they both die, let's say they're in a car accident, they both die at the exact same moment. Rachel falls to Levi for Yibum and to Yehuda. And at the same time, Leah falls to Levi and Yehuda. Remember we talked about Zika, that they're connected, right? Until they do Yibum, they're actually connected to all the brothers. Well, now you have a problem because Levi, you can see this very well from the picture, has Rachel and Leah, he's supposed to marry them both. And Yehuda is also supposed to marry them both, theoretically, which means each one is actually, this is what's called achot zekukato. If you're not allowed to, or it's kind of like that, you're not allowed to marry 2 sisters, right? And they're each supposed to marry 2 sisters. So because of that, and there's something called achot zekukato, if you can't marry someone whose sister you're supposed to do yibum with. So now we have a problem because, and that's only rabbinic, okay? And that's why they're going to have to do chalitza, not yibum. They're not exempt, but they can't do Yibum because Levi can't marry Rachel because he's supposed to marry Leah, and Yehuda can't marry Leah because he's supposed to marry Rachel, and the reverse. Okay, that's the background for this Mishnah. So therefore, Rachel has to do, right? They have to do chalitza with Rachel, and they have to do chalitza with Leah. Now, here comes our case. We're now going to come up with a case where hasura lezeh is muteret lezeh. There we said both had zika to each of them equally. We're now going to construct a case. And apparently what he's saying is you can construct a case with all 15 cases in our Mishnah where one will be permitted to one and the other will be permitted to the other, right? The one that she can't marry, the other one can marry. Okay, how do we get it? I'm going to use the case of chamoto because in a minute they're going to say that's like where we start really with chamoto. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's say mother-in-law. Okay, is mother-in-law. We're going to have the arayot of mother-in-law in this case. 4 brothers again married to 2 sisters, okay, and each wife has a child. Rachel has a child called Re'ut. Leah has a child called Livna. Notice the letters, right? R-R-L-L. That'll help you remember. So now Rachel marries Reuven and Leah marries Shimon. And then Re'ut marries Levi and Livna marries Yehuda. So all 4 of them, the mothers and the daughters, are married to these 4 brothers. Now, that's all permitted. Reuven and Shimon die. When Reuven and Shimon die, what happens? Rachel and Leah fall to Yibum to Levi and Yehuda. But Levi, his mother-in-law is Rachel, and Yehuda, his mother-in-law is Leah. So Yehuda can't marry Leah, and Levi can't marry Rachel. So in the end, the zika is only 1-to-1, and there's no 1-to-2. So therefore, Rachel is permitted to Yehuda, and Leah is permitted to Levi. Okay, and that's what means asura lezeh muteret lezeh, asura lezeh muteret lezeh. Right? Each one is forbidden to one, but permitted to the other. So even though if there wasn't more of a relationship between them, the sisters wouldn't be allowed to do yibum with the 2 brothers. They would have to do chalitza. In this case, it would work because the zika to one of them is an arayot issue. And you can basically construct that case according to the simple reading of Rabbi Chia with all 15 cases of the Mishnah. Now, and then achota sheyivimta, right? Her sister, who's also a yivama, does chalitza or mityabemet. She could also do yibum if she wanted. Now comes Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, now we're going to have three ways to understand this. Kulam, I can say all of these cases I could say, because we're going to see it's not necessarily all cases. Rav Yehuda mitargem mechamoto va'elach. Rav Yehuda says, it's not the first six cases. Shita bavi derei shalo. The first six cases are all based on Bito, his daughter. You can't have a case of Bito from marriage. You can only have a case, we're going to read this inside my timer, but you can only have a case of Bito from a rape, that would work here. You can't have Bito from an actual daughter. And therefore, our Mishnah was dealing with marriage cases, not rape cases, even though we did see maybe it was. But let's go with Rav Yehuda right now. He says it was only dealing with marriage and not rape cases. And therefore, when he said Bekulam, he didn't mean the first six, because you can't have a case. Why can't you have a case? Well, let's see. Reuven's married to Yael, and they have a daughter, Leah. Okay, and then there's still three brothers, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Reuven and Yael get divorced, or something happens. Yael then would have to marry, in order for this to happen, Yael would have to marry Shimon and have a child, Rachel. But Yael can't marry Shimon. That's in order to have two of the sisters who end up marrying the four brothers in a case where a woman would fall to Yibum to her father, it would have to be a case where Yael married Shimon, where she married the brother, and she can't marry the brother. It's a prohibited marriage. So Yael would never get to a scenario where she would marry Shimon and have a daughter, Rachel, and then the daughters both, right, they would marry Levi and Yehuda. Both of them would die. They'd fall to Yibum to Reuven and Shimon, and they couldn't because she's the daughter. And you have to have a case where each is the daughter of the other, and yet they're sisters. So you can't have each being the daughter of a different brother and yet be sisters, because that would never happen, because it's forbidden. So therefore, there is no case of that. So he says, skip the first six cases, drop them, because remember, they're all outgrowths of daughter's daughter, right? Your son's daughter. Everything was daughter related, the daughter of your wife and the daughter, right? It all went like that. But how could you have it with rape? So Reuven rapes Yael, has Leah. Now, because he raped her, theoretically, Shimon could rape Yael as well again, right? I'm not talking about he could do this, okay? If he were to do such terrible thing, but it's not the issur of Eshet Ach, because he wasn't married to the wife. So theoretically, you could have a situation where there were two daughters born out of rape, Leah and Rachel. Then they each married Levi and Yehuda. And then Levi and Yehuda both died, and they each fall to Yibum to Reuven and Shimon. Again, Leah has no relationship to Shimon, and Rachel has no relationship to Reuven. That's forbidden. So again, there you would have a case where Leah is permitted to Shimon, Rachel is permitted to Reuven, because each one, it's their father from rape. And that actually is a case, but comes Rav Yehuda anyway and says, it can't be that they're talking about that case because the Mishnah doesn't mention rape. So first explanation of Rabbi Chia is, when he said Bekulam, he didn't mean all 15. He meant cut off the first six and only starting from mother-in-law and aunt. Next explanation. Abaye mitargem af bito me'anu sato. Abaye just says simply, no, add all the cases of Bito and say it's a rape case. Doesn't bother me if the Mishnah mentions a rape case. Since there could be a case, in other words, the Mishnah mentions cases that are either from rape or from marriage. And yes, he does mean all the cases. But you can't have a case of Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'al Olamo. There wouldn't be a situation, because remember, Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'al Olamo, he'll be forever forbidden. So if there's some brother that's born later, the wife, at least according to the rabbis, will be forbidden forever to the brother, and you never have a case where, right, the wife will be permitted. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. So he says, my time, again, we don't talk about debates here. So issues that are debatable. So therefore, if it's Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'al Olamo, you would only have a situation with these, we'll see in a minute, with six brothers, that it will work by Rabbi Shimon that you could actually have a case. Since the machloket, it's not mentioned in the Mishnah. Comes Rav Safra mitargem af Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'al Olamo. So we either had, it gets rid of the first six cases. Kulan doesn't really mean Kulan. Or Kulan means everything except case number 14, because that's a machloket. Or Rav Safra is going to say it's Kulam and it includes case number 14, and I don't care that it's a machloket, and that's going to basically be our question. Didn't we say you don't say anything that's a machloket? We'll get back to that tomorrow, but let's understand Rav Safra. Rav Safra says it's even Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'al Olamo and Mishkach Ala B'Shita Achim Va'aliba D'Rabbi Shimon. And then he gives a siman. How you remember this? Meit Nolav Yibem, Meit Nolav Yibem. It's an easy way to remember. You can see that they also got confused by these cases, and that's why they gave these siman. So let's get the case, and with that, we'll finish. Yaakov and Leah are married. They have 4 sons, Reuben, Levi, Shimon, and Yehuda. Then Reuben marries Tamar. Shimon marries Yael. They're not related to each other. Okay. What happens now? We want an Eshet Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, a baby that's born after. So Reuben dies. Tamar is waiting to do Yibum. In the meantime, Yisachar is born. After Yisachar is born, Tamar can't do Yibum with him. Tamar is forbidden to him. Right now, we assume forever. Okay. According to Rabbi Shimon, there's a way she's going to be permitted, and that's what we're going to get to soon. But right now, Tamar now does Yibum with Levi. So since it was Nolad, right? It was Nolad, Mate, Nolad Yibam, right? He died, then the kid was born, then she did Yibum. So now she'll be forever forbidden according to the rabbis. And even Rabbi Shimon will say in that case, she's forbidden to Yisachar. Okay, but since she does Yibum with Levi, okay, you'll see later that if Levi is going to die, since when she's married to Levi, okay, this is Rabbi Shimon's unique law. Yisachar is in the world, right? He's alive now. When Levi dies, she's no longer going to be forbidden to Yisachar. The rabbis disagree. They say since she was married to Reuben and the kid wasn't born in Reuben's lifetime, she's never permitted. Comes Rabbi Shimon, he's going to allow it. Okay, so let's just keep going on. Shimon marries Yael in the meantime. Okay, Zvulun is born, Shimon dies, and Zvulun is born after Shimon dies. So again, we're going to have the exact same scenario. Yael does Yibum with Yehuda after Zvulun's alive, so she's going to be forbidden to Zvulun. In the meantime, Levi's going to die. This is the main thing. According to Rabbi Shimon, since Levi died and Yisachar was alive when Levi was married to Tamar, Tamar ends up being permitted to Yisachar. But Yael is prohibited to Zvulun. She's permitted to Yisachar because she married Yehuda. She married Shimon. Her first husband, before he died, Yisachar was already alive. So basically, we have a case only according to Rabbi Shimon where yet one sister can marry one of the little brothers and the other sister can marry the other one. Okay, and that's all based on this weird approach of Rabbi Shimon. The main thing to remember, even if you don't get all the details, is that according to the rabbis, Esh Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo will always be forbidden. Once you're married to the first husband, if he died before the brother was born, you will never, ever, ever be allowed to marry that brother. That's not what we're describing here. According to that, you could never have a case because the first wife will be forbidden to Yisachar and Zvulun, so she won't be able to marry either one. And the second wife will only be forbidden to Zvulun because Zvulun was already alive when her husband died. But according to Rabbi Shimon, if the first husband dies and she does Yibum with the second, and while she's married to the second husband, this kid is alive, the Isur of Eshet Ach that returned because, that was there from the beginning, because the first, she never was able to do Yibum with him. When with the second husband, she could do Yibum with him, she's already permitted to do that. Okay, so why do we bring these? Okay, you're asking. Again, I'll review this tomorrow. But we brought these 3 explanations of Rabbi Chia really just for Rav Safra. Because according to Rav Safra, what comes out? The other brother said, when Rabbi Chia said, B'kulam, all these cases in the Mishnah, I can read all these, right? We can say, Asura l'zeh, muteret l'zeh, etc. They're doing something weird, which the Gemara is going to reject tomorrow. But they're basically saying what Rabbi Chia says is as if it's in the Mishnah, even though it's not, okay? And then our Mishnah, according to Rav Safra, is talking about a case where there's a machloket. Because in this case would only be true, would only be true in Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'olamo, according to Rabbi Shimon, and that's a subject of debate. Okay, to which the Gemara is going to answer, Rabbi Chia is not the author of our Mishnah, so it doesn't really matter. It's a bit of a weird question. That's why I'll deal more with the question tomorrow. If you didn't 100% understand it, I'll start class with it before we answer the question. Okay, that's it for today. Very long daf, but we had a lot to do, and we will pick up tomorrow.